The autumn sun filtered through the tall windows of Marcus's childhood home in Westchester County, casting golden rectangles across the mahogany dining table that had hosted 3 generations of family gatherings. Claire Morgan adjusted the collar of her simple navy cardigan and smoothed her hair back into its usual low ponytail as she carried the fresh pot of coffee from the kitchen. The familiar sounds of Sunday brunch filled the air, the gentle clink of silverware against china, muted conversations about weekend plans, and the occasional burst of laughter from Marcus's father telling another one of his golf stories. Claire had grown accustomed to these monthly gatherings over the past 5 years of marriage, though she still felt like she was walking on eggshells around certain family members. "Claire, honey, could you grab the cream from the kitchen?" called out Marcus's mother, Patricia, her voice warm but tinged with the subtle assumption that Claire would naturally handle the hosting duties. "Of course," Claire replied, setting down the coffee pot and turning back toward the kitchen. As she moved through the spacious dining room, she caught snippets of conversation from the various clusters of family members scattered around the room. Marcus was deep in discussion with his uncle about the latest developments in the stock market, his animated gestures showing his passion for financial analysis. At 28, he was the youngest portfolio manager at his firm, and family gatherings often became impromptu networking sessions for him. Near the bay window, Marcus's teenage cousins scrolled through their phones, occasionally showing each other something that would prompt a burst of giggles. The normalcy of it all should have been comforting, but Claire felt an undercurrent of tension she couldn't quite shake. That tension had a name: Vanessa. Marcus's cousin sat at the head of the table like she owned the place, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the light as she gestured dramatically while recounting some story about her latest business trip to Los Angeles. At 32, Vanessa worked as a regional marketing director for a mid-sized consulting firm, and she never let anyone forget it. "So, I told the client," Vanessa was saying, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone used to being the center of attention, "if they wanted results, they needed to trust my expertise." And of course, the campaign exceeded all expectations. Claire retrieved the cream from the kitchen, taking a moment to breathe deeply and center herself. Through the kitchen window, she could see the neighbors' yards decorated with Halloween pumpkins and autumn wreaths. It was October 15th, and the crisp air held the promise of the coming winter. She loved this season, the way the leaves turned brilliant shades of gold and crimson, how the early darkness made home feel more intimate and cozy. It reminded her of her childhood in Oregon, where her parents still lived in the same modest house where she'd grown up, worlds away from the affluent suburb where Marcus had been raised. When Claire returned to the dining room, Vanessa had moved on to discussing her recent promotion, her voice projecting across the room as if she were giving a presentation. "The thing about leadership," Vanessa declared, cutting into her eggs Benedict with precise movements, "is that some people are naturally born to it, and others, well, they're better suited for supporting roles." Her eyes swept across the room and landed on Claire for just a moment, long enough for Claire to catch the subtle smirk that played at the corners of Vanessa's mouth. Claire set the cream down and took her seat next to Marcus, who squeezed her hand briefly before returning to his conversation about quarterly earnings reports. The simple gesture of affection warmed her, even as she felt the familiar isolation that came with being the quietest person in a room full of big personalities. "Claire's been keeping busy with her little projects," Patricia mentioned, clearly trying to include her daughter-in-law in the conversation. "Haven't you, dear?" The word little stung, though Claire knew Patricia meant well. To most of the family, her work remained mysterious. They knew she spent long hours at her computer and occasionally traveled for business, but she'd never felt the need to elaborate. In a family where everyone seemed to wear their achievements like badges of honor, Claire had always preferred to let her work speak for itself. "Just some consulting work," Claire replied with a modest smile. "Nothing too exciting." Vanessa's laugh cut through the morning air like glass breaking. "Oh, that's sweet. I love how some people can find fulfillment in those smaller-scale things. Not everyone needs to chase the big corporate ladder, right?" The condescension dripped from every word, though Vanessa's tone remained superficially friendly. Claire felt her jaw tighten, but she simply nodded and took a sip of her coffee. Marcus squeezed her hand again, sensing her discomfort but misreading its source. He probably thought she was just feeling shy, as she often did at large family gatherings. He had no idea that his cousin's comments felt like paper cuts, small but persistent, designed to remind Claire of her place in the family hierarchy. The truth was, Claire had grown up learning to navigate these subtle forms of social aggression. As the daughter of a mechanic and a school secretary, she'd earned her MBA through a combination of scholarships, part-time jobs, and sheer determination. She'd learned early that in rooms full of people who'd never worried about money, It was often safer to stay quiet than to risk revealing just how different your background really was. But Vanessa seemed determined to make staying quiet impossible. You know what I always tell my team? Vanessa continued, her fork poised dramatically in the air. Success isn't just about working hard. It's about working smart. It's about positioning yourself in the right circles, making the right connections, and knowing how to leverage your opportunities. She took a delicate bite of her breakfast, letting her words settle over the table like a challenge. Some people understand that instinctively. Others, she shrugged, the gesture loaded with implication. Claire felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd learned long ago that rising to Vanessa's bait only gave her more ammunition. Instead, Claire focused on the feeling of Marcus's hand in hers, the warmth of the sun on her shoulders, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing something that Vanessa didn't, something that would change everything. But for now, she simply smiled and asked if anyone needed more coffee. Chapter 2. The Cutting Edge of Kindness. The morning stretched on with the leisurely pace that marked these family brunches. Multiple courses, endless coffee refills, and conversations that meandered through topics ranging from local politics to vacation plans. Claire found herself settling into her familiar role as the quiet observer, moving seamlessly between kitchen and dining room, ensuring everyone's needs were met. She refilled water glasses, cleared empty plates, and somehow always appeared with a fresh napkin, just when someone needed one. It was a dance she'd perfected over years of these gatherings, born partly from genuine hospitality and partly from a desire to stay busy rather than navigate the complex social dynamics at the table. "Claire, you're like a mind reader," commented Marcus's Aunt Helen as Claire appeared with a warm washcloth after Helen had accidentally spilled jam on her fingers. "You always know exactly what someone needs before they ask." "It's a gift," Vanessa interjected with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Some people are just naturally service-oriented. It's actually quite valuable in today's economy. There's always demand for good help." The comment landed with surgical precision, managing to sound like a compliment while delivering something else entirely. Claire paused in her clearing of the nearby plates, her hands momentarily stilling as she processed the layers of implication in Vanessa's words. Marcus, deep in conversation with his father about the upcoming election, missed the exchange entirely. His uncle David was explaining his theory about market volatility, and Marcus was nodding along with the focused attention of someone genuinely interested in the topic. "Speaking of the economy," Vanessa continued, seamlessly transitioning as if her previous comment had been perfectly innocent. "My company just landed the Morrison Group account. It's a 7-figure deal, my biggest client acquisition to date." She leaned back in her chair with the satisfaction of someone dropping impressive news, her eyes scanning the table to gauge reactions. The announcement had its intended effect. Several family members offered congratulations, and even Marcus looked over with raised eyebrows. "That's fantastic, Vanessa," Patricia said, her voice warm with genuine pride for her niece. "You've been working toward something like that for years." "Well, you know what they say, persistence pays off," Vanessa replied, but her gaze found Claire again. "Of course it helps to be in the right field. Not everyone can handle the pressure of high-stakes client relationships. It takes a certain type of personality, confidence, strategic thinking, the ability to command respect in a room full of executives." Claire continued clearing plates, her movements steady and methodical. She'd learned early in her marriage that family dynamics were like carefully balanced ecosystems. Every person had their role, and disrupting that balance rarely went well for the newcomer. Vanessa clearly saw herself as the family's success story, the one who'd taken her advantages and turned them into something impressive. And Claire? Well, Claire was the quiet wife who made good coffee and never caused trouble. If only they knew. "The Morrison Group, that's impressive," Marcus's father said, leaning forward with interest. "I think I've seen their CEO speak at a few conferences. Sharp woman, built that company from nothing, if I remember correctly." "Oh yes, Claire Morgan," Vanessa replied, completely missing the irony as she spoke Claire's maiden name. "She's actually one of my professional heroes. Started with just an idea and a laptop, and now she's running a multi-million-dollar operation. That's the kind of entrepreneurial spirit I really admire." Claire felt a smile tug at the corners of her mouth as she stacked the plates in her hands. The coincidence was almost too perfect to be real. "You know," Vanessa continued, warming to her topic, "that's exactly the kind of ambition I'm talking about. Claire Morgan didn't wait for opportunities to come to her. She created them. She took risks, made bold moves, positioned herself as an industry leader. That's real success." The irony was delicious, but Claire kept her expression neutral as she headed toward the kitchen with the dishes. Behind her, she could hear Vanessa launching into what sounded like a well-rehearsed analysis of successful entrepreneurship, using Claire's own career as an example of everything she claimed to value. In the kitchen, Claire allowed herself a moment of private amusement as she rinsed the plates. 5 years ago, when she'd first started attending these family gatherings, Vanessa's comments might have genuinely hurt. Back then, Claire had been building her company from her spare bedroom, working 18-hour days and living on ramen noodles and determination. Marcus had been incredibly supportive, but even he hadn't fully understood the scope of what she was building. To him, she was working hard on her startup, a concept that sounded impressive, but remained somewhat abstract until the money started coming in. By the time they'd gotten married 3 years ago, her company was profitable but still small enough that Claire could run it without much fanfare. She'd kept her maiden name for business purposes, and since Marcus's family wasn't particularly involved in the tech industry, the growing success of Morgan Solutions had flown completely under their radar. She'd never hidden her work exactly, but she'd never volunteered details either. When people asked what she did, she simply said, "consulting," and let them fill in the blanks. Most people assumed that meant she helped small businesses with their websites or managed social media accounts for local restaurants. Claire returned to the dining room to find the conversation had evolved into a broader discussion about women in business, with Vanessa positioning herself as something of an expert on the topic. "The glass ceiling is definitely still there," Vanessa was saying, gesturing with her coffee cup for emphasis. "But women like Claire Morgan prove that with enough determination, you can break through. Of course, it helps to be in the right place at the right time and to have the right background for that kind of high-level thinking." She paused to take a sip of coffee, then continued with the confidence of someone who'd never had her expertise questioned. "Not everyone has the strategic mindset for that kind of success. Some people are more suited to supporting roles. And that's fine too. The world needs all types." Her eyes found Claire again as she said this, and this time the look lingered just long enough to make sure Claire understood who was being categorized as supporting role material. Claire felt something shift inside her chest. Not anger exactly, but a crystallizing of resolve. She'd been patient, understanding, diplomatic for years. She'd told herself that Vanessa's need to feel superior came from some deeper insecurity, that rising above it was the mature response. But watching Vanessa use her own achievements as a weapon while simultaneously dismissing her potential was too much. "More coffee, anyone?" Claire asked pleasantly, lifting the pot she'd brought from the kitchen. "Oh, you're wonderful," Helen said with genuine warmth. "You really do take such good care of everyone." "She's got a gift for service," Vanessa agreed, her tone suggesting this was the highest compliment someone like Claire could hope to receive. Claire smiled and began making her rounds with the coffee pot, her mind already moving toward the moment she'd been unconsciously preparing for since the morning began. It was time for dessert, and with dessert would come the conversation that would change everything. Chapter 3. The Forbes Moment. The afternoon had settled into that comfortable post-meal lull when conversation flows like honey, and no one seems in any hurry to leave. Patricia had brought out her famous apple tart, the same recipe she'd been making for 25 years, and the kitchen now carried the warm scent of cinnamon and caramelized sugar. Claire served slices around the table with the same quiet efficiency she'd displayed all day, noting how Vanessa accepted her piece with a distracted nod, already deep into another story about her professional conquests. "So there I was in the boardroom with 8 executives, all men, all older than me," Vanessa was recounting, her fork poised dramatically over her dessert. "And I could see them thinking, what could this young woman possibly tell us about market expansion? But by the end of my presentation,